But now I want to give the word, moderate the first panel, which is about pros and cons of Ethereum and other platforms. So, welcome.
Hello.
Come on, put your hands up.
Hello. Can everyone hear me? Okay, good.
Simple fashion. So if it can't be explained or if they don't have the ability to explain it, then there is a problem. There is a second question there and a third one there as well.
Yeah.
Please.
Yeah, don't you think that one of the main reasons why Bitcoin was so successful and that you didn't mention is very political? Like the idea of people regaining control on their own asset and like a more transparency. And this also is somehow against the idea of user experience of products that are so easy that people don't even have to know how they work. Because in a way I find that like if people really wants to regain control on their asset, they should know a little bit more. And maybe it's like also the role of who is building this blockchain-based product to explain more about how it works and give them like more power in this sense.
So I wouldn't go that far that the first application was rather about, bringing the spirit of democracy, back into the game. So if you rather look in the very first, say, applications for Bitcoin, it was rather for criminal intent, right? So Bitcoin was like the #1 currency for any darknet business model. And that's why I think, it got so much attention, because finally, all crooks all around the world, the mafias and whatsoever, found a vehicle in order to transfer assets. So I wouldn't go that idealistically, but, just look at the brutal business model behind that.
Have you ever done an initial soul offering? Just saying that there's a lot of cult around it, and cult cells.
Yeah, so the initial group of folks who went into Bitcoin and the cryptocurrencies in the first place are like libertarians, anarchists, and people who did not really care about the governments. And now when it goes to mass market, it's a completely different group of people. So there's a inherent conflict of interest between these two factions. So we have to kind of like bridge the gap from the place where everybody wants to be the most anarchist, like the privacy coin thing and other things, and going into these mass market applications where people do not want that.
For me, it's for me, it definitely has the political aspects, and it gives the power to this movement, but it's not the main source. And I understand politics like a marketing or cover on top of the economics. And actually, it's more about the transparency and the way how we exchange values, and the way how the monetary system was built for the last centuries, and how it impacted the politics, and how it impacted the life.
Okay, just if I think, I hope this answer satisfies you for now. If you can take a third question, there was a guy here standing who wanted to ask something.
Not a question, but I'll...
I think this guy was even before. Yeah. Sorry.
Thanks. I was put up my hand right away. My actual comment and for on the mass adoption point was that it's much more complex than UX, I think. If you think about the history of technology, we went from mainframe to fat architecture to net-centric architecture. You look at the invention of the internet, we went from TCP/IP, www, HTML, JavaScript standards, SDKs, frameworks, etc. If you look at where we are now with blockchain, right, we are trying to think about one platform trying to do everything. And I think the evolution, and this is just my perspective, and I want to hear what you guys think, is that we really need to see, specific platforms or technology used for specific things like services within an architecture. And, my mother is not going to use this until she can use her iPhone, not even know that the blockchain is being used for a transaction she's doing, whatever that transaction is, for example. But at the same time, people think that in the long term, there's going to be a DAO, there's going to be one platform, and that's going to do whatever. So my question is, for mass adoption, do you agree that there's a couple of things that need to happen, like figuring out technologies that do the data store, that do the application servers, that do the front-end UX in a way that users don't even really have to worry about all these issues that we have today?
Of course. I mean, people wouldn't, if you think about what the internet was 20 years ago, most people didn't use the internet, the World Wide Web, because it was technologically difficult and there were barriers. It's only because the user experience has massively improved and applications have grown up that are easy to use that people use it. I can imagine the same kind of trajectory, and of course blockchain technology is just one part of the whole, of a whole load of different technologies that people will use.
This whole ecosystem that you mentioned is already building up. The only difference is that most of these companies in this space are less than 2 years old. So it's just like an early phase, but it's all of this is happening already.
So if you want to create complex systems that are seamless and available and have nice user experience, you have to start with the building blocks. So you have to start typically with the dev experience in order for architects to build more compound systems and synthesize them. And then have user interactions, behavioral analytics, all of things on top. And I think we're really not like trying to see how this dev experience works. Now the shitty thing is that everybody wants to reinvent the wheel, do the same stuff. The interoperability standards are kind of weak, and that's what the TCP/IP is basically what made the internet strong. We have one language that all machines agree upon, and then we can build HTTP sessions on top of that, etc. So if we do not agree on that one language or that collection of languages that are creating that strong dev experience around it, then it's going to be difficult to push this up into the value layer or into the session layer or application layer. So yeah, I see what you mean.
I agree that we understated governance. In fact, like in a blockchain gathering in Zug, like a couple of weeks ago, where Vlad spoke specifically about governance, but not only him, also quite well-respected figures in the blockchain world especially highlighted the fact that we have not yet solved governance put in very simple words. And like those decentralized applications for sure need to have a mechanism how to deal with governance and changes to the base code and so on. But coming back to the technology stack that you mentioned before, I think we can now build upon what we have already there available. And while blockchain technology is still maturing per se, so there are so many more things that we can leverage from the existing experience we have. So we don't need to do the same exercise over and over again. It has to be more tailored to the, for example, how we reach consensus or how we scale more transactions and so on. So we don't have all the challenges the world used to have before with the emergence of internet. But for sure, governance is one of those maybe less technological aspects that will influence mass adoption.
Perhaps we have time for a last question. No? Okay. Fine. Yeah. I think this will be our last one.
Yeah. Is this? All right, perfect. So coming a little bit from the design background, we bring up UX a number of times, and I'm curious about the UX of what specifically will influence the growth at this stage most dramatically. Perhaps it's on the dev side, or perhaps we're talking about a couple of gaming applications, or we cater to speculators. I'm curious where specifically we can improve the experience that actually helps push us forward.
So I'm also a UX enthusiast, and so in terms of current availability of user experience for the end users, we only have like wallet applications and then exchanges. So centralized exchanges, centralized wallets, those are the two main things. The exchanges are still complicated for normal users, the wallets are a little bit more easy. But they do not facilitate anything else than transferring money around. So we need to see better user experience in spending those coins on something that they are intended to. And that's the user experience that we are missing currently. And that's why I think 98% of everything that moves on the blockchain is basically speculative trading.
But if you look at how some of these clever app games or whatever you have are being developed, and then they have like ways to tricking the user to buy more stuff, and then you have like an inventory of assets that you can buy with every type of. So these things actually kind of exist, no, in virtual worlds. Especially in the game scenery. So I think you can steal a lot of those ideas and map them to the utility space of blockchain. The main thing you kind of want to take care of is the paradigm shift of self-sovereign identity, and you own and control your own assets. And then the other thing would be more like the incentive games, how you build them in. But I think you can steal a lot from games as being developed right now.
And we will also face new kind of applications. So everybody thinks that the number one application is like a wallet, because blockchain is about payment. But blockchain comes also with distributed governments. And one core feature of distributed governments is voting. So now think about that you participate through your web interface in a voting scheme. So try to build a user experience such even, again, my mother, or my kids do understand what they have to do. These are completely new challenges for user experience research. And we need to solve them because this is the prerequisite in order to make, say, distributed governments or a distributed application or anything which is built on democratic principles make happen.
Okay, just one subtle thing. For example, for Bitcoin-powered applications, the user need to understand if something is taking a long time. So, for example, that's more like a feature than a bug, because maybe there is some mining happening, probably it will take a long time, so we should not really make it like, I'm thinking about notary-based services that run on Bitcoin, but the same happens for Ethereum as well. So actually with one colleague in the team that takes care about UX design, we were specifically discussing these small things that happen in the underlying layer that somehow need to be communicated to the user.
All right. So I think it's about time to conclude. So I'm sure you will see within 1 or 2 years an application or more than one applications that will be mass adopted, perhaps with some abstraction when it comes to the blockchain, just like the email did with the internet, with TCP, like who knows TCP outside of this room, who knows the email. Some abstraction might occur, but in any case, let's thank our speakers. Yeah.
Thank you. All right. Yeah, concluded the first 2 sessions of the technology part. We have a quick break and then we move over to the third one, which are special presentations. So we're going to have Pavel Romanenko from NKF Media talking about the blockchain ecosystem in Berlin, and then Arthur Roing-Bear, who is introducing the foam space. And finally, Yuri Lobintsev from Cindicator, who talks about benefits of the new economy. So we see each other again in 11:50.
So what are the killer applications like email for the internet or websites for the internet that really will make it part of our life, something that we just can't do without? And that's the question we'll try to answer together. So I think we know the speakers now, but perhaps they can tell us about a single use case that they really like within a minute or 2. And that they think could be something that tomorrow will be mass adopted. Like the email was, the email made the internet relevant for everyone in society. Is there an application, aside from ICOs, that will be relevant to everyone? We can do you can start, we can do like that.
Let's start with stuff from that side. So, we at Weeve are interested in tokenizing IoT data because we think data is the new gold. And the use case which freaks me out most, which I think is really massive, is the one where instead of paying for the data with crypto coins, you pay the other way around. So you use tokenized data, for example, in order to pay for getting access to the highway, or you pay with tokenized data in order to get an energy charge in an electric vehicle use case. So data is the new gold, and with blockchain we can really harvest, attest, and tokenize this new gold, and this way have an alternative approach to finance a lot of new business use cases.
Thanks. Yeah, please.
There's this thing we do a lot, and it's called curation, which is basically making opinion scarce, tokenizing opinion. Curation is something that people are really good at because it can create connections between different type of things better than machines. You can create knowledge graphs, any type of intelligence system on top of that. And there's a few interesting, so curation is highly connected to something called signaling. Signaling we know from Reddit, from Twitter, and it expresses your beliefs in future popularity of things. And there you can play a lot of interesting incentive games, like early mover advantages. There's things like token create registries, creation markets. And yeah, so the first thing is you'll see is things like meme markets, but you'll also see like the NFTs on CryptoKitties. They give people a way to build out an attention economy, and that's quite interesting.
Yeah, I can understand what you mean, but how about Steemit, for example? What do you think about that? You speak about curation. Steemit was quite a prominent example of that.
Yeah, Steemit has a bit of a bot problem, I think. Like what's legit content creation and what's kind of like DDoS attack on the network. So they didn't really fully nail down the scarcity of opinion right there. Proof of authentic content is something they probably want to have a look at. But yeah, I mean, if they have a nice creation layer, but I think they could be separate. Content delivery versus content attention. Yeah, it has potential.
Yeah, so tokenized incentives is, in my opinion, a huge opportunity. The games on the app stores have been dominating the most best crossing apps for a long time because they have a mechanism of acquiring users via incentives with the virtual currencies that they have inside the games. Now tokens enable everybody else to use the same mechanic to building communities, and that's what we do with Inbot. So we had a mechanism for providing introductions for businesses with artificial intelligence. And the problem was the incentivization. So if you do not have a granular incentive schedule, you do not have community engagement. So in our case, we solved that problem of community engagement, and it worked extremely well.
For me, this is my favorite question because not in terms of goals of advertisement, but this is truly what I know. I believe that my project, Cindicator, is where we have the most utilized token. We have half of our tokens being utilized by our community, and this is the way that Dimi said, where we incentivize people to bring their attention and bring their intelligence to predict the future of market behavior. Like this is the case where we have 150,000 of people in community being very active, and the ecosystem has been driven by this huge community in 160 countries. This is the use case which I believe is the most useful at this moment.
So again, we are looking for the use case that tomorrow will lead the blockchain to be mass adopted, the way the email led the internet to be relevant to each and every single one of us. Please.
Okay, so I'm old-fashioned, so my favourite use case for blockchain is still Bitcoin. Probably puts me in a minority in this room, but I think payments and transfer of value are probably still one of the most important use cases. And even when you're not using cryptocurrency directly, there are other ways that people outside the banking system can use blockchain technology to record transactions. Recently, I've been involved a little bit in a startup that is enabling already existing informal savings circles in developing countries to record the savings and loans that people make to each other in order to facilitate their economic transactions outside the banking system. So for individual people being able to interact in this way in outside the traditional banking system from which a lot of them are excluded, I do think that this value transfer, keeping records of money, currency, is still very important primary use case.
Yeah, it's true, actually. Even when earlier on someone asked what is a use case today, and ICO is one, that's true, but I mean, Bitcoin is a wonderful example. There are only 1 or 2 currencies in the world that really are accepted a bit everywhere, and you could perhaps argue Bitcoin is one of them. So how about you? What do you think?
I agree. I'd like to see payments as the use case that flies off, and most people actually, hopefully, one day will use. So mass adoption from that perspective would be like if we have, like, for example, 6 billion users of smartphones by 2020, then any one of those can actually carry out cross continents payments with one another to fuel this application of Bitcoin or other cryptocurrencies. From the enterprise perspective, and I feel like I have to also comment a little bit here, it's like in the B2B space, actually enterprises are looking how to put individuals at the center. So in that pharma use case I mentioned before, despite the entire supply chain and the fact that there is a lot of assets moving from one company to the other, what they actually seek is to provision some kind of traceability for the end consumer. This is how they think they're going to succeed in the market. The same happens very much also with the automotive industry. Actually, this is becoming a little bit like shaking the old-fashioned traditional models of the automotive industry where the car was at the center of everything. Say, for example, odometer tracking, service parts traceability, and all other use cases where the car is at the center of everything. That's not the case any longer. So in business models that I see presented by big automotive players, it's not the car any longer at the center of everything, but the end user. And looking for ways to incentivize data sharing and reward the user for various acts performed in the highway or for sharing car data and so on.
Okay, thank you. So many great use cases, and I hope some of them will become indeed mass adopted tomorrow. But then, so now we have 6 super use cases, and yet, as of yesterday at least, we didn't see the blockchain being completely mass adopted. So what are the stumbling blocks? Like, why not at the end? If the blockchain is wonderful, yet it is not yet mass adopted, what are the main stumbling block according to you, for example?
So I see the 3 main dimensions of blocks. The first is technological. Those are the speed and cost of transaction, and others, and like scalability there, and all the characteristics from that space. The second dimension is the regulations and the expectations about the regulations, the fears about this from investor side, from developer side. And the third dimension is user experience for the end user, and many blocks in that dimension.
I fully agree there. And here's a few solutions you can do. I think tackle the user experience first, because regulators will then see mass adoption and try maybe to bend the rules, or at least have a look at it that is actually something happening. So how to tackle the user experience first? It already was mentioned that it should not feel like you're using coins and you have to go through Coinbase and whatnot. Then just make something that So we have a few side projects, and some of them are really related to subcultures, tribes, digital tribes that already exist. And if you find now a way to incentivize them, to measure their value capture and to basically engage them in a system where they're really good at, knowledge contribution, for example, is one of them, I think many here agree, then just make it very, very easy to use. And that's where the Googles and the Facebooks like excel at this point in time. They're basically in your pocket. They're seemingly inside of your life. So I think we have to haul over some of their UX devs or whatnot in order to make this happen. Yeah.
But that brings back my point that if you try to go at the same time like fully decentralized, you are actually like just destroying the user experience in the process, because decentralized and user experience doesn't come together very nicely. So I see that these like these consumer applications that are totally centralized, like Robinhood or Coinbase or Revolut here in Europe, they are driving the mass adoption. We need to have more ways of spending those coins than just trading with them on those applications that are centralized, because that will drive then the adoption of the use cases as well.
Yeah, I mean, if you just for yourself, if you go to CoinMarketCap and look at the 100 coins and try to guess what's the utility. Nobody knows what the utility is, they just know that it's a tradable coin.
The only utility token, in my opinion, currently that has a real utility is Ethereum, because it's used for ICOs.
I think one of the big barriers to mass adoption is lack of engagement and ignorance on the part of the media and politicians. We have a lot of people who are writing about things. Obviously, there are exceptions, but a lot of journalists and a lot of politicians are almost proud to say, I don't care about technology, or I don't need to understand this stuff. So they're very reactive to situations. And while there are always going to be pioneers who will say, I don't care about the fact there are no regulations around this, I'm going to go ahead and do it anyway. The majority of people aren't like this. They wait to be told this is okay. And at the moment, legislation and public opinion is kind of struggling to catch up with the technology that's already there. So I think until there is definitely some positive messaging around it is okay to use this, then the average person, not people in this room or whatever, are going to be somehow blocked from wanting to use things.
Okay, so we have the UX on the one hand and the regulatory aspect of things on the other hand. Is that more or less... Is anyone in disagreement with that, or do you want to add something, perhaps?
I would like to add something. So we shouldn't forget about some novelty which comes with blockchain, and this is the magic of smart contracts. Smart contracts are programs, and the nice thing about programs is that actually they are not made for human beings. So that's why I'm a bit surprised what you people mentioned, user experience, as like one of the first priority challenges one has to solve, because blockchain technology is actually made for machines, for computers, for IoT devices, for smartphones, because these machines can parse those programs. And the nice thing about them is they are not so picky like human beings, like us. So we don't actually have to care about the user experience because there are no users involved. The user experience comes into the game once we build concrete applications, because we want to run a business behind that.
Yeah, I'm partly agreeing here. I think when we're talking about mass adoption, and so first things first, you say smart contracts are interesting for machines. I kind of agree. But and we didn't even talk about self-owned resources.
Are you saying my mother, should be able to program a smart contract?
No, but she should be able to
read it.
Especially not. She should be able to interact with it.
I have an addition to this. So when I speak in conferences about blockchain AIs, which I often do, I divide them into two different types of blockchain AIs. One is the computing AIs, which are the kind of stuff that you guys do, and then there's community AIs, which are basically like looking at the incentives, looking at how the AI can control a group of humans. And this is something so it's both. Like you cannot say that it's only the other one or the other one, because blockchains are useful in both cases.
Yeah, exactly. But I think when we talk about mass adoption right now, then I think the first hint is that get it to the user base in order for people to connect their machines to the network.
But there's also like this what Artiona is representing, this corporate AI, so corporate blockchain. So, for example, in Finland now, all the banks made an agreement. They created a foundation that manages all the real estate deals. So when somebody's selling a house and somebody's buying a house, there's always usually two banks involved. Sometimes it happens inside the same bank, but the idea is that they have now a like blockchain representation of all of those deals, like the housing, the real estate contracts that reside on this bank. So each bank has only the agreements that are made with their bank, and the other banks have others, but they are on the same technology platform all over. So that streamlines a lot the real estate deals.
Artiona, you were mentioned. What do you think about that?
Okay, I agree. I come back to your question, like how would we go towards mass adoption? In simple words, if I'm a smartphone user and if I go to App Store or Google Play, I want to download an app there that I know that provides me value, and I know that ideally, at the best case, I wouldn't have to spend fees on every kind of transaction that I perform out there. And I think with Ethereum, which is like the largest ecosystem at the moment, this has not yet proven to be a sustainable business model. That's why the enterprises have sought to find those blockchain technologies for business that actually don't involve any transaction fees. In the corporate, like that's the purpose. Like it has kind of agreed at the moment. Most of the big players have seen what's out there and have agreed that the public chains are not suitable for the enterprise, particularly for this involving the transaction fees. Me as a user, I want to go to App Store and download Steemit, and I know that Steemit is like the replacement for Facebook, and provided that we fix the problem of how do you prove content creation and authority and the challenges that come at the moment, I think that's fantastic, because there are so many more things that you can do with Steemit. You can actually encourage, like, for example, behavioral patterns that are not encouraged today. Right now, Facebook, you need to appear glamorous, like having some nice vacation in, I don't know, Hawaii or whatsoever. And the situations of people actually showing who they really are, like, for example, human beings, that's not so much incentivized. So there can be a specific plugin there for Steemit to actually, I don't know, you have heard about fuck up nights, those evenings where people come together and share how they fucked up in their lives and sharing failure stories. I think this should be incentivized more. So that could be like a plugin for Steemit to really put humans at the center and not certain models, how Instagram or other big players want to make money with, for example.
So that's the idea that I wanted to add, adding to the messaging and controversial to the user experiences blocks. There is a huge space of human psychology and human nature, and actually the nature of the earth and humanity where we are living now. We have 7.5 billion of people, where 2 billion people are not working with computer and they don't know what to eat tomorrow. We cannot talk about mass adoption in that area because people have never touched computers. This is not about even education. This is about the ecology and the ecosystem we are living in and that we are targeting. And the question is, why do we need to adopt this, and what processes we want to scale and where we need this efficiency?
I actually have a counterpoint. I mean, it's not like counterpoint in the sense that it defeats your point. It's an addition to this. So what I see now is that all these like cryptocurrencies and the ICOs that are out there are employing now hundreds of thousands of people in developing countries who are promoting those ICOs via airdrops and other mechanisms. And there's like a whole like massive cottage industry of doing this thing. And I'm super happy to see so many people who are not were not a part of the technology infrastructure in the past are now seeing themselves as an integral part of an international business ecosystem. So I think it's a wonderful thing for our world, you know, that these people can feel themselves being integrated into these ecosystems.
Okay, so now we have UX, we have even more philosophical reasons, and we have regulation aspects as stumbling blocks. Now, Bitcoin was named as a mass adopted thing. What made then Bitcoin different? Like, was it from a UX point of view easier to use? Or, I mean, I know it wasn't allowed in too many places. So how do you explain, with the hindsight, the success of Bitcoin?
So it's the first incentive machine. That's the thing. It's the first incentive machine. It's the first time that people could contribute a resource and get an incentive to do so. It's the first time that you have a network that made people do stuff and they get a reward according to the value added to the network. So it's all about the mining aspect of things.
Yeah, I think as time's gone on, even people who were originally skeptical about Bitcoin or didn't understand it kind of see that the network has this integrity that proof of work gives it, and the fact that it is now this international store of value is really important. And also it sparked something of a debate about what currencies actually are, what government issued fiat actually means, what your money in the bank is, the fact that it's not really money, it's a promise to pay. I think it's got people talking about all kinds of things. And if we look back over couple of 100 years or so on, the idea of having multiple competing private currencies, even within one country, was quite a common thing. So I think the whole explosion of other cryptocurrencies, which started with Bitcoin, has just got people thinking about what is currency, and that's a really important debate, I think.
Bitcoin was definitely first, and you know it was widely adopted. But right now it also has all of those problems that came with the early ideas that were not proven yet. So 81% of Bitcoin mining happens in China. Over 50% of Bitcoin mining is controlled by 3 different pools. 2 different ASIC manufacturers are currently dominating the mining equipment market. So the whole thing is actually much more centralized than people think.
But it's better than 111. On each of those layers.
For sure, it's better. Yeah, I mean, probably the market leads to a few players being at the top, but they are always under the threat of being replaced. They do not own the ecosystem. They're in competition with one another, so yeah, it's probably better. Is there any other factor you would name for explaining the success of Bitcoin?
The main factor for sure is first step advantage. But actually, if we look to the history of this cryptographics method, we can see that 40 years ago the idea was there. And another question, why it emerged now and not 40 years ago? And the answer is because now the humanity is ready, and because now we are facing problems, and now we need this. And it appeared because now it's the time.
I think another reason which hasn't been mentioned so far for the success of Bitcoin, the first mover technology, is simplicity. The protocol underneath Bitcoin is really, really simple, and it actually, you know, gets rid of, say, 20 to 30 years of distributed computing / consensus protocol research. Why? Because it makes use of a very, very simple trick. It's some kind of a computational client puzzle. And this is something that you can easily teach even your kids at home. But, you know, understanding those super complicated consensus mechanisms which have been designed so far, this is definitely something that, you know, broad masses don't understand.
Sebastian, you're not teaching your children Paxos?
Not yet.
Wonderful, wonderful. Is there any question from the audience? Yes, please. Oh, there are many. So.
I'm sorry, I can't remember your names, but it's mostly aimed at you. No, next to you. Yes. Speaking as a writer and journalist, I mix them together because I kind of maybe see both sides of the trying to explain technologies to people, but also writing about them. I'd like to challenge you on your statement, speaking as a journalist who does spend a lot of time trying to understand things, in that one of the reasons I find a lot of blockchain, and this is not unique to blockchain, it's across most technology, to be honest with you, is that actually founders and staff are actually terrible at explaining their ideas too, and why it's useful to anybody. And maybe that's an interesting point to discuss on why we won't have mass adoption quite yet, because actually the space is pretty bad at explaining itself as well.
Can I ask, do you specialize in the technology and blockchain space?
I specialize in the technology space, not the blockchain space, but I write a lot about it, yeah.
Okay, so my perspective is that for 20 years I was actually a journalist who programmed as a hobby. Now I am a programmer who writes as a hobby, so I can see both sides of this. The fact that you are sitting in the front row at a blockchain conference means that you're not part of the general kind of mass of journalists of which I speak, but you will find that on even some of the biggest newspapers and biggest broadcasters in the world, the specialist economics teams there. You know, tech journalists are maybe slightly apart from this, but the business journalists and the economics journalists who actually have very little grasp of economics or mathematics is absolutely astounding to me.
Well, no, I agree with you there, but that wasn't quite my question. My question is, could the founders, the creators of these projects be better at explaining themselves as well?
I think that this is something that is changing. I do understand what you say. You have a certain amount, with the current batch of ICO over promotion, you have now a lot of CEOs who don't necessarily understand the technology that their company is producing. And maybe you have some technical people who don't explain things well enough to a mass audience. But I think the former is the big problem. A lot of the people going out talking about ICOs are people who don't understand their own technology or who don't even have a team of developers yet. And that's why things don't get explained properly.
You mean statements like, it's like Uber for banks, but then without Uber and not only for banks?
I mean, I think that makes more sense than some things I've heard, but yeah.
If something is not properly explained, like from the website or from a dedicated blog post, Medium or whatsoever, take that as an indicator of the project not being very serious. So maybe it's not even worth it to deep dive into that.
I mean, there is a saying, I can only repeat that, like, what is sound should be explained in a simple fashion. So if it can't be explained,